Good day. Today I am going to discuss the topic on writing a research report. This is the overview. First part is the introduction, the importance and its classifications. Second is on the characteristics of an effective research report. Third is writing each section of the report. Fourth is on the body of the report. And lastly is on the tips on terminology, notation, and the writing style. So let us start with the introduction. So when we say research report, this is a comprehensive document that represents the findings of a research study or investigation. Now, this is a written account that outlines the process, the methods, the results, the conclusions of the entire research project. And these research reports are very common, especially in the academic and professional setting, because it is, in a way, how you know researchers communicate the outcomes of the research specifically to the audience that they intended to deliver it to. Now let us continue with its primary purpose. Now, the primary purpose of the research reports are these. First is sharing knowledge. Now, research reports contribute a lot to the existing body of knowledge by presenting new findings, insights, perspectives on particular topic. Second, it is also a way to validate methods. So reports provide a detailed account of research methods employed, and this allows others to assess the study validity and also its reliability. Second is on the informed decision making. So research reports often influence the decision making process by, of course, providing the results and also the evidence based on the information gathered in the research. Lastly is also on the academic assessment. So especially in the academic settings, research reports are often required for assignments, theses, dissertations, because it is a way to evaluate a student's understanding of research methods and their ability to contribute meaningfully to their field. Okay, now that is done, we are going to focus on the research report classifications first. So the research report is classified into two different nature. So we have the qualitative and the quantitative. So first, let's discuss the qualitative first or qualitative. So, qualitative research report is the type of report that describes a qualitative method of systematic investigations, techniques, procedures, and conclusions. And this nature of report is very descriptive in nature, compared to the second one, which is the quantitative. Now, this is a report that mainly involves systematic inquiry through numerical and statistical values. So, unlike qualitative, wherein you'll be explaining in narrative form, while in quantitative, that requires you make use of figures, formulas, and tables. And before we are able to write a research report, we need to know the what are the characteristics of making effective research report, because there are a lot of research reports um, that are available for us to read, but we need to identify what really is effective and what makes it effective. Now, these are the four ways to be able to create a very effective research report. So we have the focus, the accuracy, the clarity, and its conciseness. So first, let's discuss the focus. So an effective report emphasizes the importance of information. Secondly, accuracy. So an effective report does not mislead the reader. Third is that there should be clarity. So an effective report does not also confuse the reader. And lastly, conciseness, because an effective report does not waste the reader's time. So if you are able to remember these characteristics, especially on the conciseness, the clarity, the accuracy, and the focus of your report, you then get to be able to create a very effective research report for others to read. Now, how do you write a research report? Well, there are six steps. So, first step is on the understanding the task. Second is to develop an outline. Third is that's when you conduct your research. Fourth is That's when you write the body of your report. And fifth is on preparing the supplementary material, and six is on preparing the preliminary material. So let's start with the first one, which is on the understanding the task. So to you can't expect to receive a task um and immediately begin the process without understanding it thoroughly and analyzing what's going on around the task. So what is it about? What you really need to do? um regarding the situation, regarding your topic. That is why you should know what is expected of you. So you have to understand your task. So there are a lot of things that you need to research. You look into the terminologies, and you need to look into the kind of report that you want to make. So you need to be able to ask yourself questions such as, what is the main purpose of the research report? And you also need to look into who is the intended audience, what is the topic about, what is the expected format, and the word page size and word limit. So you cannot make a research report without understanding really what is the task that is needed of you to do. Secondly is on developing an outline. So a research plan is very useful if you are able to create a research report outline, um, like a storyboard, or even make use of tables and guides for you to be able to be systematic with your process. So this step is about, making sure that certain parts of the report um, will be used accordingly. So this also helps you easily keep track of the information that you need, what are the steps, what are the materials that you need to gather. So you need to be able to develop an outline for that. Third is that's when there's the actual conduct of the research. So both steps one and two are more of a guide for your research report. The third one is that's when you spend a lot of time in, because it's the actual conducting of the research, because you need to do a lot of investigation. You need to go through a lot of reading materials. You need to a lot of go into like academic journals and books. So you will be required to do a lot of research and experimentation, and you need to be able to also understand and analyze the strategy that you want, the method that you want to make use of. So you also have to be mindful of the references. Don't forget to list it down, especially the information, the author, and the book title, and more. On the first part is on the writing the body of your report. Now that you've done and conducted your research, it is now the part wherein you need to write the body of your report. I will be discussing the next part, what should be inside the body of the report. But in writing a body of your report, you would know what it is really that you should in what you should um add. So the steps that you need to do this is the steps that you have to do, you must remember. And that's why I will be discussing what needs to be added in the body of the report. But you need to be informed, because there are certain sections that fits its purpose. Yes. And which I'll be discussing the next topic after this. But fifth is more on the supplementary material. So now that you have your body of report, then all of your resources utilized in the report for background information included in the references and bibliography. So be mindful of those, because those will be used as additional material for your research. And the sixth part is on the preliminary material. So you must be asking, why is the preliminary material found at the last step? Well, the short answer is that these steps are meant to be written after you have clarified the rest of the steps. Like, for example, the title of the report, the table of contents, the abstract, and more. So you need to it doesn't, you need to be able to draft, you can be able to draft these things after you've done all of the other parts. Okay. Now, for step 4, which is writing the body of report, I will be discussing that now. So what is inside the body of the report? Well, the body of the report is where the purpose of your, how do you say, research report is stated. So first, it is where you can find the research statement, which will be very the main, how do you say, uh, thing that you have to consider, because that is what needs to be answered at the end. And you need to look into also the, um, since we're discussing what are the body and what it consists of, we have to yes, give out what are really in part of the report. So first you have to include the introduction. Second is the literature review. Third is it's on methodology. Fourth is on the results. Fifth is on the discussion, and oh sorry, sixth is on the conclusion. I sorry, discussion, and six is on the conclusion. Okay, so this is we'll start with the introduction. So this is where the purpose of your report is stated, and this is when the research statement will come in handy to encapsulate your research report. So, a brief assessment of existing literature on the issue may also be included in the background material so that you may set the area of where your study will be taking place. Okay, so first again is the introduction. Second is the literary review. So when you say literature review, this is where you need to be able to organize your findings properly. um that is why you need literary review. So um it is very beneficial to adopt a chronological structure, especially when describing the study, your study. It's best that it's structured from beginning to end. So there should be like a timeline. So, alternatively, you may also write in a thematic format, highlighting the many themes that are uncovered while you were doing the research. Third step, a third part of the research is on the methodology. So, you need to be able to clearly mention the technique that you use in your study, and it must be stated in such a way that another researcher can easily refer to your findings if they so choose. So, any like diagrams, charts, and graphs should be clearly labeled and numbered there. Next is on its results and discussion. So this is the part where your results can be found from the research. So you have to be mindful of this section so that because this is when you will present your findings, um, present but not interpret yet, because that will be done in the discussion. So you can include tables and charts and other forms of diagram to be able to present your results if you did go to the quantitative research part. But if you went to the qualitative, then you please support it with supporting graph as well, especially when you do a narrative or analysis report on certain kinds of research. The fifth is on the discussion. So this is when you actually describe the significance of the study. This is when you will be interpreting the findings. And you also need to relate that to review of literature. Especially, you have to also look into your thesis statement, what needs to be answered, and it is found in your introduction. On the conclusion, which is the ending part, this is the summary of the most important discoveries and outcomes of your research that you have uncovered. Okay, and this section should not include any new information. So basically, you are just wrapping up your study. This is the end. So you could point out even the limitations and delimitations of your research, and where research would be more beneficial for future studies. Okay, so to review, so these are the body composition. We have the introduction, literary review, the methodology, the research and discussion, and also the conclusion. Okay, now let us continue. with the general tips on terminology, notation, and the writing styles. So, for terminology, first tip here is you have to know your audience and what terms they understand, because many research reports include technical terms. So, before you start writing your report, you have to decide who your intended readers are. So, if you do not know whether those readers will be familiar with your technical terms you intend to use. So you have to make an effort to really find out who they are. Because if you're going to use, how do you say, if you're going to use uh, tech, how do you say, technical kind of terms that may be very unfamiliar to your readers, so they may not be able to, many might not be able to understand. So that's why if you do want to make use of terminologies that are unfamiliar, please provide an explanation of those terms, because people that will read your research need to know and understand what it correctly. Okay, second part is labels. So label each variable in your report with a term that describes only what it actually measures. So please do also remember to avoid labels that have excessive meaning, labels that imply more information than the variable it actually provides. Because if the for example, if the measurement is a score on the vocabulary test, like um so call it like word meanings, don't call the verbal ability. Because if the measurement is on the score of on a task of classifying objects, for example, you have to call it classifying objects, don't call it non-verbal reasoning. Because sometimes people um make use of certain terms that are quite vague, and it's actually not what they intended to measure. Okay. Now let's second one is, if your report introduces a new concept, don't use labels that are commonly used for some similar concept. So when readers see a familiar term, they expect that term to have its usual meaning. So if the meaning that you intend is not what you used, then of course the readers will be definitely confused, so you have to use another term then. Next is on the terminology, which is on new terms. So if you introduce new terms, make sure the readers understand that you are introducing a new term. Don't explain the term in a way that implies that your new term is new and common. So you have to be very particular with that. So you have to inform them that you are using a new term. Next one is on terminology as well. So when you use labels, you have to make sure that it's short and it's descriptive. Because, for example, in experimental studies, so if your report includes 2 or 3 treatments or measurements, then you have to identify each one by adding short descriptive labels. So, for example, treatment A, treatment B, so that it will be easier for them to understand and find better labels, a better understanding of the label, because sometimes it can be very difficult. So you have to make your report easier to read. That is the goal. Next is, don't use the same term to mean two or more different things. So if you use, for example, for teachers, they would use weighted average. So it refers to the average of, I don't know, the scores on a test. So don't use that same phrase to mean other things like average of this, average of that. So you have to be very particular. So don't use the same term to mean two or more things. Okay. Next is, don't for abbreviations. So next is, you have to avoid unfamiliar abbreviations. What does that mean? Um Why is it important? Because unless you are sure that your intended audience are familiar with it, um, if you are not sure, then it will be very difficult for your readers to understand, because the more new or unusual abbreviations your report contains, the harder it will be really for the readers to remember what each of those abbreviations mean. So if you want to a report to be readable, I think the ideal number of using abbreviations to use is very little. Maybe even zero. So don't even think about using a new or unfamiliar abbreviation, because again, um, to phrase it can also be, how do you say, difficult, because sometimes it's quite long, very difficult to read, and it can appear many times in your report, which is not very concise at all. So as much as possible, please do not use an unfamiliar abbreviations in your report. Next is on abbreviation still, which is to include the complete phrase at least once. So every abbreviation or the acronym in your report should be written out in full where it appears in the report, because then people would know that it is what it means, even if it is obvious or even if it's common knowledge, for example WHO. So you have to at least include the phrase World Health Organization at least once, so that they will just understand what you're referring to. Next is on abbreviations, and be careful when you make up a new abbreviation. So if you must use a new abbreviation in your report, don't use an abbreviation that your readers will associate with a different term or phrase, because um abbreviation, because that might confuse them. You also have to avoid any abbreviations that um um readers might, how do you say, be seen as inappropriate, because again you have to consider about, the cultural implications of certain abbreviations as well. Now let's continue with mathematical notations. So for mathematical notations, first tip is to in each symbol should have only one and only one meaning. So don't use a symbol to mean one thing in one formula and then use that symbol to another formula. And that's just, it's very confusing. So if your report includes mathematical formulas, so be sure to remember that to remember to make use of only one symbol, and only once or that symbol, and it should have one meaning. Okay, now let's continue with the second tip on notation, which is to not change the notation. So do not use different symbols to represent different things. So if you represent this as this, then it should be that only. So don't make use of different symbols. 'Kay, that again, it will only make it very confusing. Next is to um, avoid new uses of symbols that have traditional meanings for your readers. So if your readers are accustomed to us to saying a symbol in a with a particular meaning, and you will confuse them because you use that symbol to mean different thing, so that is very confusing. Many readers will definitely get confused. So in general, you have to follow the, how to say, the conventions that your readers are accustomed to. So if you are writing for readers who are accustomed to seeing capital letters for this and that, and lower letters for this and that, so you have to follow that convention, or else it will be very confusing for your readers. Next is on writing styles. So you're not in that. So you have to avoid long sentences. You have to, again, one of this the characteristic of an effective research report is that it should be concise. Now this is a problem. It's very easy to eliminate. All you really have to do is to divide these long sentences, and you have to make sure it's not more than 35 words. Okay, so then you could just make it into two or even short sentences, because again, we need to be able to make it clear for our readers to understand what our report is about. Next on writing style is that first person pronouns such as I and we are now allowable in scholarly writings. So for many years, authors of research reports avoid using the word I or we and the possessive our. But those days are over. Simple sentences beginning with I and we are now acceptable in research because they intend to make it really clear, uh, and for the viewers to understand what they try to mean. Next is on the writing style. So which we'll talk about the research question. Now for the research question, it should be stated early, especially right in the introduction. Second is that it should be plain and simple in language because that is the most important part of your research. Okay? And lastly, it should be also precise. Um in the introduction of research report, it should be clear, concise, it should be plain, it should be use simple language because these questions are what the researcher intends to answer, and it should be clear to the readers as much as possible. Okay, and now let us continue with the next one. So before you, this is now on citing. So before you cite a paper like an article or a book cover, you have to read and definitely think about it. Because in most research, the introduction includes a review of previous research already. And when you write a review of your previous research, you need to be able to read and understand that because you will be using that as your references, especially when it comes to the recommendations, the generalizations, the opinions, really, especially when you write it at the end, when you try to relate it with other literature. Next on writing style, so you have to be careful. You have to include the important details and you have to leave out the unimportant details. So deciding which details are important enough to include in the research is sometimes difficult, but there is a general principle that will really help with this. The report should include the details um, that are important and that can definitely make a difference in your research. So if the for example, if the study includes a questionnaire or a test that readers will not be familiar with, then the report should not also include that since they are not familiar with that. You also have to be careful of copyright. Next is on the writing style. So if you transform any variables, you have to explain why. Because again, research data is more on being able to transform one or two variables. So it's best that you are, how do you say, informing them of what are the changes or the transition in terms um, of your research. Now let's continue with the writing style. So you have to put the most important results up front because when you write the results in the results section, it is best that you begin with the results that directly answer your research questions because then also for the benefit of those who are really interested in your research, then you may present the results of the other analysis, but you have to look into what directly answers your research question. Next is on what really matter on writing style. What really matters is the size of the effects, especially when you look into statistical information or results. So it's not really on the size, but rather on the significance level. So it's important that report statistics should look into the effects and if the effects are significant or it's not significant because this is the only information really that can that the readers need to know. So if you are able to make sure that you um that there is this answer on statistical significance, then that would be then make it an effective research. Next is on writing style. So use statistics that can communicate your results clearly. So what statistics should you use to make sure that your um, results clearly? Well, it depends on what really you intend that to. answer, because there are different statistical methods and procedures that you should be aware of, and to be able to communicate these statistical data, you need to be able to make use of numbers, percentages, tables, or graph. Now, statistical information directly answers the questions, right? But if we are to look into the numbers or percentage, when do we use? For example, if we want to know um, uh, the report on um, certain data about, like, out of 23 out of 35 students, so 23 out of 25 students. So sometimes making use of data percentages can make it easier and more informative for them to understand. So it's quite difficult to process when you say 100 138 out of 437. But if you change that to a percentage, you would say 32%. So that is when it makes it more clear. Next is whether also quite difficult to understand whether or not to use table or graph. Well, sometimes you need to look into the results of a particular analysis. So just like the difference between scores and percentages, um, with tables and graph, you have to understand that tables are better than graphs for numbers, but graphs are better than tables for showing relationships. So if you want to look into the relationship between numbers, we use graph. But when we do want to present the numbers, let's make use of tables. Okay. And there are also a lot of other purposes. For example, this one. So this one is more on tables, because it then you are clearly communicating the um actual what needs to be in presented. Now, if for writing styles, I've mentioned that graphs are the best way to show comparisons and relationships. Now, last but not the least is on pointing out the limitations of your study. So you have to make the readers or future researchers understand that there are certain parts of your studies that were not included. So you have to generalize the results to and to generalize and conclude, and also at the same time give out the limitations of the study, so that the readers are aware of the shortcomings of your study as well. So I think this is the end of my presentation. Let me also share to you the references of today's presentation as well. So thank you very much for listening to my lesson, to my presentation about writing styles, and I hope that you learned some parts of my lesson. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.